Hey, this is David with No Chaser, and today I want to talk about what I believe is at the root of every relapse. Now, a relapse can come from a seemingly endless amount of reasons. They can be really large ones, major setbacks in your life, a lot of external terrible things going on. It can happen because of setbacks in your mental health, just kind of a funk that you've gone into, a deep depression, other struggles with mental illness. It can happen because you've just become complacent or you've become too dissatisfied with the life you had. Or maybe sobriety wasn't all you thought it would be, or it didn't give you the things that you thought it was going to give you. It can happen because of boredom. Sometimes it can happen because things are going too well. As crazy as that sounds, there's plenty of people who, were doing really well and they thought things would be okay. There's so many different ways that a relapse can start and how they can manifest. But I believe that there is something that is at the core of every single one of them. I believe there is an ingredient that is involved with the making of every relapse. That ingredient is delusion, delusional thinking. I think delusional thinking has to be a part of the relapse process because despite what's going on in your life, despite the hardships that you're facing, if you are an alcoholic and an addict, and you decide to go back out, most alcoholics and addicts are sane and rational beings. And to go back out is almost a measure of insanity. And at least it has to be a choice that is created from delusion, because if you were completely objective and separated from the desire and the obsession of alcohol and drugs, then you would there would be no way. I felt worse and had more shame about all the times I'd relapsed. Even more so than, having to reconcile the fact that I spent years drinking daily. I'm not saying that was great by any means, but I could at least understand that or sympathize with that more. Like when you're caught in the cycle, when you're in the thick of it, of the day in, day out, you got so many things that are pushing you to just keep drinking and using. The momentum's too strong. Like you'll start going through withdrawals. You're in a constant state of crap. It's bringing you down. It's become so habitual. You don't know any other way to live. Like when you're in the thick of it, I wouldn't condone it for myself doing it, but I can understand that more than relapsing, because relapsing seems so much worse to me because I wasn't in the middle of it. I had clarity. I had stepped away from it, and I became a little bit more autonomous in my decision making, and yet I still chose to go out. Not only to the damage of myself, but to the hurt of others. Like how could I do that? And that's what, one good sign of delusional thinking is right after the decision made is so many people go, how did I do that? How could I do that? That sentiment I've heard that sentiment after nearly every story of relapse, or every person that said they went back out. One of their first thoughts was like, how in the F did I get myself to this place? How did I convince myself that how did I end up here? And delusional thinking has to be a part of that. The kind of the main ones, or the ones that you can hear of most often, is that people, alcoholics especially, they go, I'm going to try to drink like a normal person. You know what? I'm going to try drinking normally. Now, here's the thing. One, normal people don't consider drinking normally. They just do or they don't. It's not even a consideration that's on their mind. Like I assume most people, when they drink, they don't like just pinpoint the idea of like, I got to drink normally tonight. I got to drink normally this weekend. I don't think that's a thought that really occurs in their mind. The other thing here, and this is the delusional part again, is that go to your average person. An average person who drinks every once in a while, has wine with dinner, has beers with the buddies, smokes weed, maybe does a little bit of harder drugs on every now and then at some party scene. These things can kind of decipher with, where you're at culturally or where you're at in your life. Like if you're in college, obviously drinking's more prevalent. When you're younger, it is, if you're in a big drinking family and around holidays, all that type of stuff. But just go to the average person and give them this proposition. Hey man, if you drink, there is a serious chance you're going to ruin your life. And I would have to think that most normal people would be bummed out, but they would definitely comply. Simply because they would just measure the risk and rewards, and to most normal people, the drinking or smoking weed or doing drugs every once in a while isn't worth ruining their life. I mean, that's part of being an alcoholic and addict. We put way more value on drugs and alcohol than the average person. So if there was like a real, if there was tangible evidence for the person to be like, this could ruin your life, the normal person would be like, all right, well, I guess I can't do that then. Like the idea that you're going to drink normally is still crazy, just for the fact of what you're risking. Like the idea is like, all right, well, I'm gonna drink like a normal person, even though I'm risking completely screwing my life up. And then when it comes to drugs, you could say, all right, well, all people who try drugs are kind of doing that risk, right? Because there's so many messages and things that have been put out there about how drugs can ruin your life. But even that's different, just solely for the fact of like when you've done that, you don't have real tangible evidence and experience that shows it can ruin your life. For addicts and alcoholics, you have a track record that shows how it has brought on terrible consequences, how it has destroyed your mental health at times, or it's trashed your relationships, or your occupational history. I mean, you have real evidence that there's a real risk here if you do this. And for what? The reward of being able to have a couple beers during the game, or having a couple glasses of wine, or just a one lost weekend in Vegas to do some drugs. I mean, no. If there was that real risk, that would be insane to do that. Just like delusional thinking is. So the other thing, now this might be obvious too, but a lot of times people relapse under the delusional thinking that it will be different. And this is one that I've heard a lot from people, is that, when shit was going crazy because of my drinking or using, I was just at a different point in my life. I'm a different person now. I got my stuff together. It will be fine this time. I mean, really at the root of my addiction or my drinking, I mean, all that stuff was just where I was at in life. I have one person I know that they talk about this, and it rings so true, at least to me, where he constantly thought for a lot of his life is that my problem isn't with drinking. My problem is I just need to grow up. And it was just funny to him, because he's like, drinking was preventing him from growing up, and just growing up wasn't the problem. It was the drinking. But that's another common delusion, is just to think that, I'm at a different place, and therefore I will have a different mindset. And again, to really look at the delusion of it, it's just to go back to the thing I mentioned earlier about the risk. I mean, again, if you're going to do this normally or responsibly, despite all the evidence you have in your life that you have not been able to do that, despite even that, if you're going to do it, what is the benefit you're getting that's going to outweigh the risk of destroying your life? I mean, just again, if there wasn't any delusions to this, you would just weigh that out and be like, well, no. I mean, I can't, because the risk is too high. No pun intended. But and that, again, a lot of this stuff may be like, all right, well, yeah, I've heard this type of stuff before. I know the delusions that can go into the mind, especially these delusions are driven by a lot of desire and a lot of just that mental gymnastics we'll do when we really want to do something we know we're not supposed to do. And again, when I'm saying, delusions, this is not to say that this is stupid or you're being dumb for thinking this stuff. Just think of it as like people that are brilliant that have problems with mental illness and have delusional thinking. When those brilliant people are having delusions and they believe, things that aren't in reality, do you think they're stupid? No, it's just clearly a delusion they're having. Like there was that one movie about this brilliant mathematician. I think it starred Russell Crowe. It was like a Beautiful Mind. There was that movie where he's like a genius mathematician, but he thought crazy stuff was happening, like people were following him. When he said, like, I think people are following me, we're like, man, you're a real idiot. I know you just got like the Nobel Prize in math, but you're a real dumbass. No, because there is that difference between being stupid and the delusion. So I'm not quite, I don't want this to come off as saying that, if you've relapsed, you've had this delusional thinking because you're just not with it, or you're dim, or anything. It has nothing to do with that. Now, again, a lot of this may seem patently obvious about what leads to relapse, but one of the main reasons I want to talk about this, and this comes a lot from my own experience, is that there is another part to relapse that I used to consider was separate. So I would call this the relapse of apathy. And what I've said a lot to people, what I would say at meetings all the time, and I would proclaim it and truly believe it, was I didn't think I was ever going to drink normally. I didn't think that I was not alcoholic. I had too much proof. I knew who I was, and I just relapsed because screw it. I just didn't care anymore. I was just in a state where I didn't care about the consequences. I was so unhappy and miserable being sober that you know what? Drinking is better. The misery of my active alcoholism is better than this. So I knew that nothing was going to change, but it was better than the reality I was in. I would really say this and believe this. And that may seem totally plausible. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks I was kind of a douchebag when I would say this, because in this weird way, I was almost like, oh, no. I wasn't stupid like you guys, or I wasn't delusional like you guys. I just didn't care about my life. As if that was some higher ground or something. I don't know. The point is that no, delusion fueled that too. Because it was delusional to think where I was going to be after drinking. Because it's like, okay, you're ready for terrible consequences? You're ready to completely screw up and destroy your life? Are you? Do you not care at all about your life? Are you willing to kill yourself? Truly, are you willing to kill yourself? This may seem like totally hyperbolic, but it's really not. Again, if I was not thinking without delusion, I would be like, I hate my life now, but I know that my drinking has always gotten worse. I know it's led me to near suicide. It's led me to almost irreversible damage to other people. Like, I may not care about my life, and I may be stuck in this rut, but I can't drink because it will be worse than that. If I was in a totally right, unaltered state of mind, I would still know that as shitty as I feel right now, that drinking was going to be way worse. And that was where my delusion was at. It was truly at it's going to be bad, but manageable bad. I think if you really press me on it, I don't know what excuse I would come up with. Because again, if you put a gun to my head at that moment, I would beg for my life. But I would drink, and I thought that this wasn't totally killing myself, because it's not a gun to my head. It's drinking. But where that was going to lead was death, or somehow something even worse. It was going to lead there. And again, this is not me having some brash rhetoric that it was so bad you guys don't even know. I mean, it was just a matter of fact, because I knew at that point it always progressed into something worse. So let's say it's not even death. As shitty as I feel right now, this is going to lead to something worse. And that's where the delusion was. I somehow thought in my mind that, yeah, it's going to be sucky, but it won't be worse than what I'm feeling. But it really, really is. It really would be, because it proved to be every single time. There was times where I was in a psych ward or in the hospital, and I just thought, Jesus, remember when I thought that I was ready for these consequences? When I was sitting in jail, I was just like, hey, remember when you thought that jail wouldn't be that bad? And these are things that, again, without that delusional thinking, I would know. And there would be other times for a relapse when it's like, this is too overwhelming. I'm just going to give in. And it was this thought that I'm just going to give in, which is kind of crazy in the sense of it's like, what? I'm just going to be like an alcoholic for a weekend? I'm just going to be an alcoholic over Memorial break, like, or over 4th of July break. I'm just going to be like a crippling alcoholic just over the holidays. Like, what was really my plan of this? Like, I'm just going to give in. I'm just going to relapse and jump back out. Have I ever had the control to just dip in and dip out? If I had the control to do that, I wouldn't be in this position in the first place. I've never been in the control of that. Like, once I start drinking, I'm now on a train that is on a track, and it's very, very, very hard to get it off the tracks. And here's the thing. As much as I'd be a craving and obsessed over it, even in that moment, if I did drink, it was only going to be harder. As hard as that moment felt, it was only going to be harder from that point on if I drank. Because I know once it's in me and I start the cycle, it's completely out of my hands. You know, I know there are some people who had relapsed and they were in the cycle of it and they just got so sick and tired of being sick and tired that they got to a point where they were ready to quit, or they, you know, something bad enough happened where it got to a point where they were ready to quit. But again, if you really think about it, if you proposition that person with the fact of like, there is a way you don't have to go through that. The way is to not drink now. And you won't have to put yourself through that suffering. That suffering is actually unnecessary if you don't drink now. You don't need that pain to get you to stop. But the obsession is so overwhelming, and especially if you're in that mode where you're recently sober, that's a whole different story. I mean, in all honesty, I don't know how much I'd consider that in the typical sense of the relapse. I'm more talking about if you have like an extended or some significant period of time and then you go back out. By the way, significant has to be in context. Like for me, for drinking for years, having a month was a significant amount of time. It was at least enough time to clear my head. It was at least enough time to like get to normal in some sort of way. I know there's like, after effects, that things that linger. You're not completely back to normal even after a month, 2 or 3 or 6 months after you've quit drinking or using, but enough to where I felt like I had the autonomy of my own choices. And so to choose to go back out, I had to be delusional about something. Whether it was the fact that I could drink normal, whether it was the fact that I would just kind of like, I don't know, compartmentalize my relapse, where I would just drink for like a month or just a couple of weeks, or whether I was like, I didn't think that I cared. There was still the delusion that, no, if you had this choice, it's going to be worse from now. You don't understand that as terrible as you feel right now, there is a worse place to be, and that's where drinking will take you. I had to completely, call it what you want. Call it delusion, call it denial, call it ignorance. To me, it's all wrapped up in a specific type of thinking that gets you to make a choice that a completely sane person with the experience of an alcoholic or an addict would not make. Again, just the risks and the rewards are not there. You have to be a little bit deluded to think that this is a choice that is acceptable to make. And I don't want this at all to come across as some judgmental thing for saying that, like, it's ridiculous that you relapsed. If you put these things out there and lay it out there, how could you? That's look how deluded you are for doing that. No. It's, again, I have done this many, 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 many times. I have believed these things. I have been able to convince myself of these things that weren't connected to reality. And it has nothing to do with being smart. It has nothing to do with being out of touch. The delusional thinking. You can be convinced of something that goes against all rationale if you allow yourself to be in a place where desire is starting to overcome the consequences, where your misery or the place where you're at is just not enough. You don't have enough substantive, positive things in your life to be able to disregard the crazy thoughts. If you're, in a way, think about your alcoholism or your addiction as like a cult. The crazy thoughts that cults believe, who do they go after? They go after vulnerable people. And again, you hear all the time that it's not all kooky, silly, dumb people that join cults. Plenty of very smart, intelligent, capable, independent people join cults. It's because they're at a vulnerable time. And that's where the delusional thinking comes in. It has nothing to do with you as a person or the quality of your mind. It is where you're at vulnerable. Is where you're at in your vulnerability to believe or make a choice that you would otherwise know you should not and you can't make. That's all I'm saying. Alcoholism and addiction is like a cult in your own head, if that doesn't sound crazy. Hey, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content and are interested in hearing more. I'll be producing a lot more videos covering a wide range of topics. And I also have an email I'm going to list below. If you have any personal questions or comments or ideas for topics or just something about your experience. I love any sort of feedback like that. And if you have just general stuff too, just put it in the comments below. Thanks.